Commander Zexthal adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus as the massive human warship materialized on their view screen. The vessel looked nothing like the sleek, elegant craft of the Galactic Coalition. Instead, it resembled a floating fortress of angular metal and brutal efficiency. Scorch marks decorated its hull like battle scars, and weapon ports bristled along every surface. Incoming transmission from the human vessel, reported his communications officer, her voice trembling slightly. The entire bridge crew of the Coalition flagship Harmony's Edge had gone silent, watching the primitive-looking ship with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed disdain. Zexthal straightened his forearms and activated the communication channel. The face that appeared on screen made several of his officers step backward involuntarily. The human captain was scarred, weathered, and possessed the kind of predatory smile that evolution had programmed every civilized species to fear. Most disturbing of all were his eyes, pale blue and absolutely without mercy. "I am Captain Marcus Chun of the Terran Defense Force vessel Retribution," the human said, his voice carrying an accent that sounded like grinding metal. "You are hereby ordered to surrender your ship and prepare to be boarded for inspection." A ripple of shocked chittering ran through Zexthal's crew. The audacity was breathtaking. This single human vessel, crude and primitive by Coalition standards, was attempting to give orders to a ship carrying representatives from 12 different advanced civilizations. "Human," Zexthal replied, allowing his natural superiority to color his tone. "You seem to be confused about your position. We are the Galactic Coalition fleet, tasked with bringing your species into compliance with civilized law. You will stand down and prepare for integration into our protection protocols." The human captain's expression didn't change, but something shifted in those pale eyes. It was like watching a predator calculate the distance to its prey. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of calm that preceded violence. "Commander, you've made two critical errors in your assessment. First, you assumed that bigger means better. Second, you assumed that we came here to negotiate." Before Zexthal could respond, his tactical officer's voice cracked across the bridge. "Sir, energy signatures are spiking across the human vessel. I'm reading weapon systems that don't match any known technology in our databases." The human captain leaned forward slightly, and that was when he smiled. Not the polite expression of diplomacy that civilized species used, but the baring of teeth that every prey animal recognized on an instinctual level. It was a smile that promised violence, and delivered on that promise without hesitation. "You see, Commander," the human continued, "your coalition has spent the last 1,000 years developing technology to make war more efficient, more clean, more civilized. You've created weapons that disable rather than destroy, systems that prioritize minimizing casualties over achieving objectives. It's very humane of you." Zexthal felt a chill run through his secondary nervous system. "What are you implying, human?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you directly. Humans never forgot how to wage total war. We never developed past the need to completely destroy our enemies. While you were perfecting your stunners and your sleep gases, we were building things that turn entire fleets into expanding clouds of superheated plasma." The tactical display suddenly exploded with new contacts. Ships were decloaking around the Coalition fleet, dozens of them, appearing from seemingly empty space. Each one bore the same angular, aggressive design as the Retribution, and each one was powering weapon systems that made Zexthal's most advanced targeting computers issue error messages. "Impossible," whispered his science officer. "Stealth technology that advanced would require energy signatures we should have detected. The power requirements alone." Captain Chin's smile widened. "You're thinking like a civilized species again. You assume that advanced means efficient, clean, minimal waste. Human stealth technology is exactly the opposite. We hide our ships by making them radiate so much energy that your sensors can't distinguish them from background stellar radiation. We don't minimize our power signature. We maximize it until it becomes invisible." Zexthal's tactical board was painting an increasingly grim picture. 47 human vessels now surrounded his fleet of 12 ships. The tonnage advantage still favored the Coalition, but those energy readings from the human weapons. "Commander," his weapons officer reported, his voice barely steady, "I'm analyzing their weapon signatures. These aren't conventional energy weapons or kinetic systems. The readings suggest they're using controlled antimatter reactions as projectile systems. The yield on a single torpedo would be equivalent to our main battery firing for 6 continuous minutes. That's insane, Zexthal muttered. The engineering challenges alone. The safety protocols required. Safety protocols, Captain Chen repeated, somehow having heard the comment over the open channel. There's another civilized assumption. You assume that any rational species would prioritize the safety of their own personnel over tactical advantage. Humans gave up on rationality a long time ago, Commander. We decided that winning was more important than surviving the victory. The human captain's fingers moved across controls that Zexthal couldn't see, and suddenly, every screen on the Coalition bridge was displaying the same image, a small, blue-green planet orbiting a yellow star. It looked peaceful, almost primitive, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans. "This is Earth," Chen said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. "Population, 8 billion humans. We've survived ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid impacts, and 3 different attempts at nuclear extinction. We've fought wars that lasted centuries and conflicts that consumed entire continents. Every single human alive today is the descendant of survivors, Commander. We are what's left after 10,000 years of natural selection favoring violence, tenacity, and the absolute refusal to surrender." Zexthal stared at the planet on his screen. It looked so small, so insignificant compared to the massive worlds that house the Coalition's core species. How could such a tiny planet have produced these terrifying creatures? "Your Coalition," Chun continued, "represents 12 species that achieved spaceflight through cooperation, diplomacy, and the gradual expansion of their civilizations. You developed faster-than-light travel through careful research and shared knowledge. You built your fleet using the combined resources of multiple worlds." The image changed, showing the human fleet in all its crude, aggressive glory. Each ship looked like it had been built specifically to kill things, with no regard for aesthetics or comfort. Humans achieved spaceflight through competition and conflict. We developed faster-than-light travel because we were racing against the possibility of our own extinction. We built this fleet using the resources of a single world because we've never learned how to truly cooperate. Every advance in human technology has been motivated by our desire to destroy our enemies more efficiently. Zexthal's communication officer suddenly spoke up, her voice tight with fear. "Sir, I'm receiving messages from our other ships. They're all reporting the same thing. Human vessels have achieved target locks on every Coalition ship simultaneously. Their weapons are powered and ready to fire." The human captain's smile never wavered. "The thing about humans, Commander, is that we've never been the biggest or the strongest or the smartest. But we've always been the most willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Your Coalition sees war as a regrettable necessity, something to be concluded as quickly and cleanly as possible." Captain Chen leaned back in his chair, his scarred hands folded calmly in his lap. "Humans see war as our natural state. Peace is just the time between conflicts when we prepare for the next fight. You want to integrate us into your Coalition, to civilize us, to teach us your peaceful ways." The tactical display showed energy building in the human weapons systems. Power levels that should have been impossible for ships that size were climbing steadily toward firing thresholds. "But here's what you don't understand, Commander. We don't want to be civilized. We don't want to be peaceful. We don't want to join your Coalition." The human's pale eyes seemed to look directly through the screen and into Zexthal's soul. "We want you to leave our space and never come back. And if you won't do that voluntarily." The power levels reached critical thresholds across the human fleet. Weapon systems that violated every known principle of safe engineering practice hummed with barely contained destruction. "Then, we'll make you leave in pieces small enough to fit through a recycling unit." Zexthal felt his breathing apparatus struggle to process the sudden surge of stress chemicals flooding his system. Around him, his bridge crew stared at their displays with expressions of growing horror. The humans weren't bluffing. These weren't negotiation tactics or intimidation strategies. These were predators explaining to their prey exactly how they were going to die. And, in that moment, As Captain Marcus Chin's smile promised violence beyond anything the civilized galaxy had seen in 1,000 years, Commander Zexthal realized that the Coalition had made a terrible, possibly fatal mistake. They had assumed that humanity could be reasoned with. The silence on the bridge of Harmony's Edge stretched for exactly 17 seconds before Zexthal's survival instincts overrode his diplomatic training. His four hands moved across his control console with practiced efficiency, opening a channel to the rest of the Coalition fleet. All ships, this is Commander Zexthal. Implement Emergency Protocol 7. Power all defensive systems, and prepare for immediate tactical withdrawal. Captain Chin's laughter cut through the tension like a vibroblade through silk. The sound was harsh, genuine, and completely devoid of humor. Protocol 7? Let me guess. That's the one where you put up your shields, charge your weapons, and try to back away slowly while maintaining a defensive posture. Very civilized. Very predictable. Zexthal's tactical officer looked up from his displays, his normally steady hands trembling. Commander, they're not powering their weapons anymore. Energy signatures are dropping across their fleet. For a moment, hope flickered through the bridge crew. Perhaps the humans were backing down, recognizing the superior numbers of the Coalition fleet. Perhaps this was all elaborate theater designed to intimidate them into negotiating from a position of weakness. Captain Chin's expression suggested otherwise. If anything, his smile had grown wider, revealing teeth that evolution had designed for tearing flesh from bone. You're wondering why we powered down our weapons, aren't you, Commander? You're thinking that maybe we've realized we're outgunned, outmanned, and out of our league. The human captain stood from his chair and walked closer to the camera. Behind him, Zexthal could see the bridge of the human vessel, a cramped, utilitarian space filled with screens showing tactical data, weapon status, and what appeared to be real-time feeds from other human ships. No art, no comfort features, no aesthetic considerations. Just cold efficiency designed for one purpose. The truth is much simpler, Chin continued. We powered down our weapons because we don't need them anymore. You see, Commander, while you were implementing your emergency protocols, my tactical team was analyzing your ship configurations, your defensive patterns, your formation structure. And what we discovered is absolutely fascinating. Zexthal felt his secondary stomach clench. What do you mean? Your ships are marvels of engineering, I'll give you that. Elegant, efficient, powerful. But they share one critical design flaw. They were all built by civilized species. Species that fight wars to achieve political objectives, that seek to minimize casualties, that try to preserve infrastructure and resources for post-conflict reconstruction. The human's pale eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the screen, as if he were reading data that only he could see. Your shields are designed to absorb and deflect energy weapons. Your armor is optimized to resist kinetic impacts and thermal damage. Your redundant systems ensure that you can survive massive amounts of damage and continue fighting effectively. Around Zexthal, his crew members exchanged glances. Their ships were indeed designed exactly as the human described. The Coalition had spent centuries perfecting defensive technologies that could withstand any conceivable attack from known weapon systems. But here's the thing about humans, Chin said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. We don't use conceivable weapons. We use inconceivable ones. Weapons that civilized minds reject as impractical, dangerous, or simply insane. The tactical display suddenly changed. Instead of showing the human fleet's positions, it was displaying schematic diagrams of Coalition ship designs. Detailed, accurate diagrams that showed internal layouts, power distribution networks, and critical system locations. How do you have our ship specifications? Zexthal demanded. We don't, Chin replied casually. We're generating them in real time. Every Coalition ship broadcasts continuous status updates to maintain coordination between your different species' technologies. Very efficient. Very cooperative. Very vulnerable to anyone who understands how to interpret the signals. Zexthal's communications officer spoke up, her voice tight with panic. Sir, they're right. Our formation coordination protocols are transmitting detailed system status reports. If they've broken our encryption... Oh, we didn't break your encryption, Captain Chin interrupted. Breaking encryption is what civilized species do when they want to gather intelligence over time while remaining undetected. We did something much more human. The display changed again, showing a string of mathematical formulas that hurt to look at. The equations seemed to writhe and shift, defying conventional understanding of how numbers should behave. We used brute force quantum computation to calculate every possible encryption key simultaneously, then tested them all against your transmissions in parallel processing streams. It took about 15 seconds and probably shortened the lifespan of our quantum processors by several thousand years, but we got what we needed. Zexthal's science officer was staring at the equations with an expression of professional horror. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone the quantum coherence would collapse under. Would collapse under any sane computational load? Yes, Chen agreed. But humans stopped caring about quantum coherence about the same time we stopped caring about safe radiation exposure levels, acceptable casualty rates, and environmental sustainability. When you're willing to sacrifice anything to win, impossible becomes just another engineering challenge. The human captain returned to his chair and touched a control that Zexthal couldn't see. Immediately, every coalition ship's defensive systems began registering impacts. Not energy weapons or kinetic projectiles, but something else entirely. Something that passed through their shields as if they weren't there and struck their hulls with surgical precision. "What are you firing at us?" Zexthal shouted. "Nothing," Chen replied. "We're not firing anything at all. We're transmitting." The tactical officer's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sir, I'm reading massive structural damage across the fleet, but I'm not detecting any incoming weapons fire. It's like our ships are tearing themselves apart." Captain Chen nodded approvingly. "Now you're beginning to understand. You see, Commander, every piece of matter in the universe vibrates at a specific frequency. Find the right frequency, and you can make anything resonate. Push the resonance hard enough, and the molecular bonds start to fail." The display showed a real-time cutaway view of one of the coalition cruisers. Zexthal watched in fascination and horror as microscopic fractures began spreading through the ship's hull, following the precise pattern of its structural support framework. "But you'd need impossible amounts of power to generate resonance frequencies that could affect structures that large," Zexthal protested. "Impossible for a civilized species, yes. But humans learned a long time ago that if you can't generate enough power efficiently, you generate it inefficiently. Our resonance transmitters are basically controlled stellar fusion reactors with the safety systems removed and the output channeled through quantum field manipulators that shouldn't exist." The fractures in the coalition cruiser were spreading faster now, and similar damage was appearing across every ship in the fleet. Hull plates were beginning to separate along their molecular bonds, and internal systems were failing as their mounting points lost structural integrity. "The beautiful thing about resonance weapons," Chen continued, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a particularly elegant equation, "is that they're completely non-lethal right up until the moment they're absolutely fatal. Your ships aren't exploding, Commander. They're just coming apart, like a puzzle box that's been shaken too hard." Zexthal's engineering officer was frantically trying to compensate for the spreading damage, but every system he attempted to reinforce simply became a new target for the resonance patterns. "Sir, we can't counteract this. Every time we try to strengthen our structural supports, they just resonate at a different frequency. It's like they're analyzing our countermeasures in real time and adapting." "Because we are," Chen said simply. "Human tactical computers don't just process information, Commander. They learn. They adapt. They evolve. Every second of this engagement has made our systems more efficient at destroying yours." The coalition flagship shuddered as a particularly large section of hull plating separated and drifted away into space. Emergency containment fields activated automatically, but Zexthal could see that they were temporary solutions at best. His ship was slowly dissolving around him. "You want to know the real difference between humans and civilized species?" Captain Chen asked, leaning forward with that predatory smile once again dominating his scarred features. "Civilized species fight wars to achieve objectives. Humans fight wars to win. You're trying to integrate us into your coalition, to make us follow your rules, to turn us into something that fits your definition of acceptable." Another section of hull separated from the flagship, taking with it one of the primary sensor arrays. The bridge lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate for the damage. But we don't want to be integrated. We don't want to follow your rules. And we sure as hell don't want to be acceptable. The human's pale eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire that belonged in the heart of a star. We want you to understand that humans are apex predators who learned to build starships. We are death incarnate with faster-than-light capabilities. We are everything that evolution designed to kill, refined, and focused into a species-wide weapon system. The Coalition fleet was coming apart like tissue paper in a hurricane. Ships that had taken decades to build and represented the pinnacle of multiple civilizations' technological achievement were simply ceasing to exist as coherent structures. And the humans hadn't fired a single conventional weapon. So here's what's going to happen, Commander, Captain Chen said, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. You're going to evacuate your crews to your escape pods. You're going to transmit a message to your coalition leadership explaining exactly what happened here. And then you're going to leave our space and never come back. Zexthal stared at the human captain, understanding finally, dawning like the light of a dying star. And if we refuse? Captain Chen's smile reached its maximum intensity, transforming his scarred face into something that would haunt Zexthal's dreams for the rest of his life. Then, we'll show you what our actual weapons can do. The evacuation of the Coalition fleet proceeded with the kind of desperate efficiency that only imminent death could inspire. Escape pods launched from disintegrating ships like seeds from a dying flower, each one carrying survivors who had just learned that everything they understood about warfare was wrong. Commander Zexthal stood on the bridge of Harmony's Edge as his crew prepared the final evacuation protocols. Around him, the flagship's superstructure groaned and shifted as molecular bonds continued failing throughout the vessel. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the ship became uninhabitable, and maybe 20 before it ceased to exist as anything more than an expanding cloud of component atoms. Captain Chun remained on the view screen, watching the evacuation with the patient attention of a predator observing wounded prey. His expression had shifted from active malevolence to something that might have been professional courtesy, if such a thing could exist between species separated by an evolutionary gulf of violence. Commander, Chen said, his voice carrying a tone that was almost conversational. Before you leave, I want to share something with you. Consider it a final lesson in the differences between your people and mine. Zexthal paused in his review of evacuation procedures. Despite everything that had happened, his scientific curiosity remained intact. Understanding these humans might be crucial for the Coalition's survival. What lesson? You're wondering how we developed technology this advanced while remaining isolated on a single planet. You're trying to reconcile our primitive appearance with our obvious technological superiority. You're thinking that none of this makes sense according to your models of civilizational development. The human captain was exactly right, and Zexthal realized that his confusion must have been obvious in his expression. Every Coalition species had followed the same basic pattern: achieve planetary unity, develop sustainable technology, expand carefully into space, make contact with other civilizations, join the greater galactic community. Humans had apparently skipped most of those steps. The answer, Chen continued, lies in understanding what drives technological advancement. Your species developed new technology to improve quality of life, to solve problems, to expand knowledge for its own sake. Very admirable. Very civilized. On the tactical display, another Coalition cruiser finally succumbed to the resonance weapons, its structure collapsing into a sphere of metallic debris that would eventually form a small asteroid field. Humans developed new technology to kill each other more efficiently. Every major advancement in human civilization has been motivated by warfare. We invented metallurgy to make better weapons. We developed chemistry to create better explosives. We discovered nuclear physics to build better bombs. We achieved spaceflight because we wanted to drop rocks on our enemies from orbit. Zexthal's evacuation coordinator reported that the final escape pods were ready for launch. The bridge crew was prepared to abandon ship. But something in the human captain's tone suggested that this conversation was far from over. Even our peaceful technologies were developed for military applications first. Our medical advances came from trying to keep soldiers alive long enough to fight again. Our communications technology evolved from battlefield coordination requirements. Our manufacturing capabilities were designed to produce weapons faster than our enemies could destroy them. The human's pale eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the camera, perhaps reviewing data streams that Zexthal couldn't imagine. Your coalition has been peaceful for over 1,000 years. You've had that long to perfect your technologies, to refine your methods, to create the most advanced civilization in known space. You should be invincible. Captain Chen leaned forward, and his predatory smile returned with renewed intensity. But you made one critical error. You assumed that advancement meant efficiency, elegance, and sustainability. You built technologies that work within the known laws of physics, that respect thermodynamic limitations, that consider long-term consequences. The bridge of Harmony's edge shuddered as another structural support beam separated from its mounting points. Gravity fluctuated briefly before the compensators managed to restore stability. They were running out of time. Humans never learned to respect limitations, Chen said. We never accepted that something was impossible just because it violated known physics or required insane amounts of energy or carried unacceptable risks. When we encountered a wall, we didn't look for a door. We brought bigger explosives. The view screen split, showing not only Captain Chen's face but also a series of technical diagrams that hurt to look at directly. The design seemed to incorporate principles that shouldn't work together, powered by energy sources that violated conservation laws, built from materials that existed in quantum states that should have been unstable. Take our faster-than-light drives, for example. Your coalition uses elegant manipulation of space-time curvature, carefully calculated to minimize energy requirements and avoid paradoxes. Very safe, very predictable, very slow. Zexthal's science officer, even while preparing to evacuate, couldn't resist studying the human technical displays. His expression shifted from professional interest to growing horror as he began to understand what he was seeing. "Sir," the science officer whispered, "their FTL technology, it's not manipulating space-time. They're literally tearing holes in the universe and flying through the gaps. The energy signatures suggest they're using controlled black hole formation to create temporary wormholes." Captain Chen nodded approvingly. "Your science officer understands. We don't travel faster than light, Commander. We cheat. We break the universe temporarily, fly through the cracks, and let reality repair itself behind us. It's incredibly dangerous, completely unstable, and absolutely insane by any rational standard." The technical display zoomed in on what appeared to be a human FTL drive core. The device looked more like a contained singularity than any reasonable propulsion system. Energy readings fluctuated wildly around levels that should have torn apart any ship attempting to contain them. "It's also about 10,000 times faster than your most advanced drives," Chen added casually. "When you're willing to risk destroying your ship, your crew, and potentially several star systems every time you engage your engines, you can achieve velocities that careful engineering would never allow." Zexthal felt his understanding of the universe shift in fundamental ways. The Coalition had always assumed that any species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel would naturally develop along predictable lines. Safety, efficiency, sustainability. These weren't just engineering principles. They were moral imperatives that guided civilized development. "Your weapons," Zexthal said slowly. "The resonance transmitters that destroyed our fleet. They operate on the same principle." "Exactly. Your shields and armor are designed to withstand any attack that follows known physics. Our weapons ignore known physics entirely. We don't generate resonance frequencies using conventional methods. We tap directly into quantum vacuum fluctuations and amplify them using principles that most of your scientists would classify as impossible." The final Coalition escape pods launched from the dying fleet, carrying survivors toward the edge of the system where they could transmit their reports back to Coalition space. Zexthal watched them go, knowing that he would be joining them in moments. "The beautiful irony," Captain Chen continued, "is that your advanced civilization makes you more vulnerable, not less. You've optimized your technologies for maximum efficiency and safety. You've eliminated redundancies and chaotic variables. You've created systems that work perfectly within predictable parameters." The human captain's smile took on an almost philosophical quality. "But chaos is humanity's natural element. We thrive in unpredictable situations. We build systems that work despite being fundamentally unstable. We've turned instability itself into a weapon. Zexthal's evacuation coordinator reported that the command crew transport was ready. The flagship had perhaps 5 minutes of structural integrity remaining. As he prepared to leave the bridge that had been his command for over 8 years, Zexthal found himself asking the question that would haunt him forever. Captain Chun, what happens now? Will you pursue our escape pods? Will you follow us back to Coalition space? The human's expression shifted, becoming something that might have been genuine regret. That depends entirely on your Coalition leadership, Commander. We didn't seek this conflict. We were content to remain in our corner of space, developing our technologies and fighting our own wars. You came to us. On the display, the human fleet was already beginning to disperse. Ships that had appeared from seemingly empty space were disappearing again, fading back into stealth configurations that made them indistinguishable from stellar background radiation. But now you know we exist, Chen continued. You know what we're capable of. And you have a choice to make. You can leave us alone, go back to your peaceful civilization, and pretend this never happened. Or you can decide that humans represent a threat that needs to be eliminated. The lights on the bridge flickered one final time before failing completely. Emergency power cast everything in a dim red glow that made Captain Chen's scarred face look even more demonic than usual. If you choose the second option, the human said, his voice carrying the finality of entropy itself, then you'll discover that everything you've seen today was us being polite. You'll learn what human weapons look like when we're actually trying to win a war instead of just sending a message. As Zexthal made his way to the escape pod, Captain Chen's final words followed him through the corridors of his dying ship. And, Commander, when you make your report to Coalition leadership, make sure they understand one thing. Humans don't surrender. We don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We win, or we make sure nobody else does either. The escape pod launched just as Harmony's Edge finally lost structural cohesion. As Zexthal watched his flagship dissolve into its component atoms, he realized that the Coalition faced a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could leave humanity alone and accept that there were predators in the universe too dangerous to disturb. Or they could try to eliminate the threat and discover whether 12 civilized species could defeat one that had never learned the meaning of restraint. The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council convened in the Great Crystal Amphitheater of Nexus Prime, the administrative heart of civilized space. Representatives from 12 species sat in carefully arranged tiers, each delegation positioned according to ancient protocols that balanced political influence with biological requirements. The air itself shimmered with translation matrices, ensuring that every word spoken would be understood across the spectrum of coalition languages and communication methods. High Chancellor Vorthike called the session to order with a harmonic resonance that carried the weight of 1,000 years of peaceful governance. Her species, the ethereal Kithara, had evolved beyond physical form centuries ago, existing as pure consciousness that manifested through controlled energy patterns. In times of crisis, her presence could stabilize even the most chaotic political situations. The reports from Commander Zexthal have been distributed to all delegations, she announced, her voice carrying across dimensional frequencies that most species couldn't even perceive. We are here to determine the Coalition's response to this human problem. Ambassador Crix THL of the Mechanical Hegemony was the first to speak, his cybernetic voice cutting through the chamber with calculated precision. His species had long ago replaced their biological forms with sophisticated machine bodies, valuing logic and efficiency above all else. The data is conclusive. These humans represent a clear threat to coalition stability. Their technology violates established physics. Their military doctrine prioritizes destruction over diplomacy. They must be eliminated before they can spread their chaos beyond their home system. A wave of agreement rippled through several delegations, but it was immediately countered by the melodic dissent of the Botanical Collective's representative. The walking tree creature named Bloom of Distant Stars spoke with the slow wisdom of a species that measured time in geological epochs. Elimination is not the way of growth. Perhaps these humans can be cultivated, guided toward more productive applications of their destructive tendencies. You cannot cultivate a virus, interjected General Crack's ID of the warrior caste. His species, the predatory saurians, were the coalition's primary military force, despite their commitment to civilized warfare. I have analyzed the tactical reports. Human weapons technology operates outside acceptable parameters. They have weaponized chaos itself. This cannot be permitted to spread. High Chancellor Vorth AK allowed the debate to continue for several minutes before calling for order. The various species had predictable positions. The mechanical minds favored logical elimination, the elder biologicals preferred patient diplomacy, the military castes wanted immediate action, and the scientific communities demanded further study. It was the kind of productive disagreement that had characterized coalition governance for a millennium. What worried her was the representative who hadn't spoken yet. Ambassador Nulthax of the Void Seekers sat in his specially constructed isolation chamber, a being of living darkness that existed in the spaces between atoms. His species was ancient beyond measure, having achieved consciousness before most of the galaxy's current stars had formed. When the Void Seekers spoke, it was usually because they had perceived something that others had missed. Honored Nulthax, the Chancellor said, directing her attention to the shadow-wrapped chamber. Your analysis of the human threat? The darkness in the isolation chamber seemed to deepen, and, when Nulthax spoke, his words carried the weight of cosmic time itself. Threat is the wrong word, Chancellor. Threat implies danger that can be mitigated through appropriate action. What humanity represents is something far more fundamental. The chamber fell silent. Even species that had been at the edge of heated argument turned their attention to the ancient being whose perspective spanned geological ages. I have observed the rise and fall of 17 major galactic civilizations, Nulthax continued, his voice seeming to come from the spaces between heartbeats. Each followed predictable patterns: emergence, expansion, contact, cooperation, integration into larger galactic communities. Each developed technologies that prioritized efficiency, sustainability, and the minimization of existential risk. The Chancellor felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. And humanity? Humanity represents the antithesis of civilizational development as we understand it. They are evolution's answer to the question, what happens when intelligence develops in a species that refuses to be civilized? They are what we might have become if we had never learned to cooperate, to compromise, to seek solutions that benefit everyone. General Crack's ID leaned forward in his command chair. Then, they can be defeated through superior organization. Their refusal to cooperate makes them weak, not strong. The darkness in Nulthax's chamber pulsed with what might have been amusement. General, you misunderstand. Humans do cooperate, but only within their own species and only when facing external threats. They have spent their entire evolutionary history in conflict with their environment, their predators, and each other. This has produced a level of tactical adaptability that civilized minds cannot comprehend. Ambassador Crix THL processed this information with mechanical efficiency. Adaptability can be countered through superior technology and numerical advantage. The coalition fleet numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Human forces, according to our intelligence, consist of fewer than 1,000 vessels. Intelligence gathered from what sources? Nulthax asked, and the question carried implications that made several delegations shift uncomfortably in their seating arrangements. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Chancellor Vorthake spoke. We have no reliable intelligence on human capabilities beyond what was observed during the incident with Commander Zexthal's fleet. Precisely, Nulthax said. We know nothing about their total military capacity, their strategic resources, their technological development timeline, or their long-term intentions. We know only that a single human task force destroyed a coalition fleet using weapons that operate outside known physics. Bloom of Distant Stars rustled his leaves in what passed for concern among his species. Perhaps we should attempt diplomatic contact. Surely any intelligent species can be reasoned with, given sufficient time and patience. The darkness in Nulthax's chamber seemed to contract, becoming denser and more profound. Ambassador, I have lived long enough to witness the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. In all that time, I have encountered only 3 species that could not be reasoned with through conventional diplomacy. 2 of them destroyed themselves through internal conflict before achieving interstellar travel. And the third? Chancellor Vorthicke asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. The third learned to build starships. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber like shock waves through space-time. Representatives who had been advocating for various forms of engagement suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions. If humanity truly represented something unprecedented in galactic history, then all conventional approaches might be not just ineffective, but actively dangerous. General Crack's ID was not convinced. Ancient wisdom aside, we must deal with practical realities. These humans have demonstrated hostile intent toward coalition forces. They have technologies that threaten our security. Military doctrine requires that such threats be neutralized. General, Nulthax replied, consider this. Humanity developed their current technological capabilities while confined to a single star system, surrounded by no external threats except those they created for themselves. What do you imagine they might develop when faced with an existential threat from an alliance of 12 advanced civilizations? The question hung in the air like a toxin, poisoning every strategic calculation that the coalition military had developed. If humans could create reality-breaking weapons while fighting only among themselves, what might they create when fighting for survival against external enemies? Ambassador Crix DHL's mechanical mind processed multiple scenarios simultaneously. The logical solution is overwhelming force applied before they have time to develop additional capabilities. We mobilize the entire coalition fleet, coordinate a simultaneous strike against their home system, and ensure complete destruction before they can respond. And if we fail? Bloom of Distant Stars asked quietly. Then, we discover what human weapons look like when they're designed for extermination rather than intimidation, Nulthax answered. We learn what a species looks like when it abandons all restraint and commits itself entirely to the destruction of its enemies. High Chancellor Vorthicke felt the weight of decision settling around her like a gravitational field. The coalition faced a choice that would define the next era of galactic history. They could attempt to destroy humanity and risk triggering a war against an enemy that had never learned to surrender. They could try to isolate human space and hope that the problem would resolve itself over time. Or they could attempt some form of diplomatic engagement and risk exposing the rest of galactic civilization to humanity's particular brand of chaotic violence. I call for a preliminary vote, she announced. All in favor of immediate military action against human space. For delegations raised their symbols of assent. All in favor of diplomatic engagement. 3 delegations responded positively. All in favor of isolation and containment. For more symbols appeared. The vote was too close, too divided. A decision of this magnitude required consensus, not a bare majority driven by fear or hope or ancient wisdom that might no longer apply to current realities. The matter will remain under consideration, Chancellor Vorthicke declared. All delegations will prepare detailed analyses of their preferred approaches. We reconvene in one standard cycle to reach a final decision. As the representatives began filing out of the chamber, Nulthax's voice echoed once more through the crystalline space. Chancellor, while we debate the proper course of action, remember that humans are not waiting for our decision. They are adapting, preparing, evolving their capabilities in response to our threat. Every moment we delay, they become more dangerous. The darkness in his isolation chamber seemed to reach toward her across impossible distances. And they have already demonstrated that they consider us an enemy worth destroying. The chamber emptied, leaving Chancellor Vorthicke alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that whatever decision the coalition made, the galaxy was about to change in ways that none of them could fully comprehend. 6 months later, the coalition's decision came not through careful deliberation, but through the harsh mathematics of survival. The choice was made for them when long-range sensors detected something that should have been impossible. Human ships deep in coalition space, moving with purposes that civilian minds were not equipped to understand. Admiral Kestar commanded the Nexus Prime Defense Fleet from her flagship, the massive dreadnought Concordia Eternal. Her species, the crystalline hierarchs, had evolved in the zero-gravity environments of asteroid fields. developing translucent bodies that could withstand incredible physical stress. She was considered one of the finest military minds in Coalition space, a strategic genius who had never lost a fleet engagement in 40 years of service. None of which mattered when her sensor operators reported what they were seeing. "Admiral," her tactical officer announced, his crystalline voice cracking with stress harmonics. "I'm reading 17 human vessels in the outer system. But their signatures, they don't match anything from our previous encounter reports." Kestar studied the tactical display, her compound eyes processing information across multiple visual spectrums simultaneously. The human ships were definitely there, but they looked nothing like the angular, aggressive vessels that had destroyed Commander Zexthal's fleet. These ships were smooth, organic-looking things that seemed to shift and flow as if they were alive. "What's their status?" she asked. "Unknown, Admiral. They're not responding to our communications, but they're not approaching either. They're just waiting, holding position at the edge of the system like they're studying us." Kestar felt her tactical instincts engaging, calculating firing solutions and defensive patterns automatically. But something about the human vessels troubled her. They didn't look like warships. They looked like predators. Time to intercept if they maintain current course toward Nexus Prime? "Approximately 18 hours, Admiral. But their drive signatures suggest they could reach us much faster if they chose to. Their engines are operating at what appears to be minimal capacity." The Admiral's strategic mind processed this information with growing unease. Humans who could have attacked immediately but chose to wait were humans with a plan. And any plan that required patience from a species known for its aggressive directness was probably something that civilized minds wouldn't want to understand. "Signal the emergency defense protocols. All Coalition fleets to converge on Nexus Prime. Priority override on all military communications." She paused, studying the alien ships on her display. "And give me a direct line to High Chancellor Vorth AK. She needs to see this." The connection to the Chancellor established within minutes. The crystal communication matrix carrying Vorth AK's energy pattern directly to the Admiral's bridge. "Admiral Kestar, what is the nature of the emergency?" "Humans, Chancellor. 17 vessels of unknown configuration in our outer system. They appear to be waiting for something, but I can't determine their intentions from their current position." High Chancellor Vorth AK's energy pattern fluctuated with what might have been concern. Waiting for what? Before Admiral Kestar could respond, her communications officer announced an incoming transmission from the human fleet. "Admiral, we're receiving a signal from the lead vessel. It's Captain Chun." The view screen activated, showing the same scarred face that had haunted Coalition strategic planning for the past 6 months. But something had changed. Captain Chun looked older, more weathered, and his pale eyes carried a weariness that spoke of decisions that no sane being should ever have to make. "Admiral Kestar," he said, his voice carrying the same controlled menace that had become his trademark. "High Chancellor Vorth AK, thank you for accepting our communication request." "Captain Chun," the Chancellor replied, her energy pattern shifting to formal diplomatic frequencies. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit to our space?" The human smile was different now, less predatory, more resigned. It was somehow more terrifying than his previous expressions of open hostility. "We're here to deliver a message, Chancellor. A final communication before we implement what humans call the Scorched Earth Protocol." Admiral Kestar had never heard the term, but something about the way Captain Chun pronounced it made her defensive systems activate automatically. "What is this protocol?" "It's what happens when humans decide that the universe would be better off without us in it, Admiral. But before we remove ourselves from existence, we make sure that the threats that drove us to that decision are removed as well." The tactical display suddenly erupted with new contacts. Hundreds of them, appearing from stealth configurations throughout the system. Not just around Nexus Prime, but around every inhabited world, every space station, every Coalition facility within a 50 light-year radius. "Impossible," Admiral Kestar whispered. "Our sensors would have detected that many ships. The gravitational distortions alone would have been obvious to any civilized detection system." "Yes," Captain Chin agreed. "But we stopped using civilized detection methods about the same time we stopped using civilized weapons. Our ships have been in your space for 3 months, Admiral. Watching, learning, preparing." High Chancellor Vorthake's energy pattern destabilized briefly before reasserting itself. 3 months? That's impossible. Our border security, our patrol networks, were designed to detect ships that operate according to known physics, Chancellor. Our vessels have been using what we call probability manipulation to exist in quantum states that your sensors interpret as background radiation. We've been everywhere. We've seen everything. We know the location of every coalition military asset, every population center, every critical infrastructure node. The tactical display now showed the true scope of the human deployment. Every strategic location in coalition space was targeted by multiple human vessels, positioned with surgical precision for maximum destructive effect. "What do you want?" Admiral Kestar asked, though she was beginning to suspect that the question itself was irrelevant. "We want you to understand something, Admiral. Humans tried to remain isolated. We were content to fight our own wars in our own space. But you couldn't leave us alone. You decided that we needed to be integrated into your civilized society or eliminated as a threat to galactic stability." Captain Chen's expression shifted, becoming something that transcended mere human emotion. It was the look of a species that had made a decision that would echo through cosmic history. "So we adapted. We evolved. We became the threat you thought we were." The human's pale eyes seemed to look directly through the communication link and into the souls of everyone listening. Every human vessel in your space is equipped with what we call universal conversion devices. Weapons that don't just destroy matter. They convert it into energy states that cannot be restored to previous configurations. Admiral Kestar's tactical mind struggled to process the implications. "You're talking about weapons that could sterilize entire star systems." "Not could, Admiral. Will. In approximately 6 hours, every human vessel will simultaneously activate their conversion devices. Every coalition world, every space station, every ship, every trace of your 12 civilizations will cease to exist. The total energy release will be visible from other galaxies." The bridge of Concordia Eternal fell silent except for the harmonic vibrations of stressed crystalline structures. This wasn't a threat or a negotiation tactic. This was a species announcing their intention to commit genocide on a galactic scale. "But why?" High Chancellor Vorthake asked, her energy pattern flickering with genuine confusion. What could possibly justify such an action? Captain Chen's smile returned, but now it carried the weight of inevitability itself. "Because humans learned a long time ago that if you can't win, you make sure the other side loses. You forced us to choose between integration and extinction. So we chose extinction for everyone." The human captain leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked less like a military commander and more like a tired man carrying a burden that no individual should ever have to bear. "You see, Chancellor, your coalition made one final error in understanding humanity. You assumed that survival was our primary motivation. But humans value something more than survival. We value the right to determine our own fate. And when faced with the choice between submission and mutual annihilation, humans will choose annihilation every single time." Admiral Kestar found her voice, though it carried harmonics of disbelief. "You're talking about destroying yourselves as well. Extinction for your own species." "Yes," Captain Chen replied simply. "But extinction on our terms, Admiral. Extinction as a choice rather than as a consequence of defeat. And extinction that takes our enemies with us." The tactical display updated again, showing energy buildup patterns across the human fleet. Whatever they were preparing to do, the preliminary charging sequences had already begun. Weapon systems that operated outside known physics were powering up simultaneously across hundreds of star systems. "Is there nothing that would stop this?" the Chancellor asked desperately. Captain Chun considered the question for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice carried the finality of entropy itself. "You could withdraw every coalition ship from human space. You could dissolve the councils that voted for our integration or elimination. You could guarantee in writing, witnessed by every species in the galaxy, that humanity would never again be contacted by any coalition member." The human's pale eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire that belonged at the heart of dying stars. "But even if you did all of that, Chancellor, it wouldn't matter. Because you've already demonstrated that civilized species see humanity as a problem that needs to be solved. And problems, in civilized thinking, are temporary states that can be corrected through appropriate action. Captain Chin stood from his chair and walked closer to the camera. So we're implementing a permanent solution. In 6 hours, there will be no more problems, no more threats, no more conflicts between civilized species and evolutionary apex predators. The communication link wavered as if the transmission itself was struggling to maintain coherence in the face of what was being discussed. Just peace, Chancellor. The kind of peace that comes when there's nothing left alive to disturb it. The signal cut off, leaving Admiral Kestar and High Chancellor Vorthake alone with the tactical displays showing hundreds of human ships preparing to end galactic civilization. Around them, their respective crews worked frantically to find some solution, some countermeasure, some way to prevent the complete extinction of everything they had built over thousands of years of peaceful cooperation. But as the energy readings from the human weapons continued to climb toward activation thresholds, one truth became increasingly clear. They were watching the end of the galaxy as they knew it, delivered by a species that had never learned the most fundamental principle of civilized existence. Sometimes, there are no acceptable solutions. Sometimes, everyone loses. And sometimes, that's exactly what one side intended from the beginning.